State?
Yes, Judge, and if I might have a minute to approach the
Yes.
TV and prepare. I do have one PowerPoint slide that I want to talk to at some point during closing, Judge. I'm going to load it up now. May it please the court, opposing counsel. Judge, at the very beginning of this trial, I told you that the state's theme of the case was summed up into a single sentence, and that is that with ownership comes responsibility. I would actually like to amend that now. After having talked to Dr. James Crosby the day that he testified over Zoom, I want to change that a little bit. I want to change it to, with ownership comes duty. Because that is something that Dr. Crosby agreed with the state about, right? Throughout the course of his work, he always emphasizes that owners have a responsibility, owners have a duty. Why? Because who better than the owner, who spends every day with the animal, to know about the animal, right? The state also said during the course of opening, before we began this punishment phase, that we believed that after everything was said and done and all the evidence was before you, the evidence would be overwhelming of not just criminal negligence, but gross criminal negligence, going on for the course of years. That there was no way that these two defendants did not know everything there was to know about those dogs that they spent every single day with, right? Mr. Aristotelides' defense counsel says that ACS was consciously indifferent. Based on everything we saw during the course of this punishment phase, the people that were consciously indifferent to the danger that these dogs pose to society, the danger that these dogs pose to their neighbors, were Christian, Moreno, and Abilene Schnieder, and the evidence of that is overwhelming. Overwhelming. Throughout the course of the trial, Judge, we brought you every single witness that we could find and track down from that neighborhood to come in. And when we talked to them, we found out, like we kind of expected, that they were all saying the exact same thing. That all of them talked to Christian Moreno and Abilene Schnieder about what was going on, that they let them know what was going on, that they were afraid of their dogs, that their dogs were always on the loose over a course of years, and they did nothing about it. Conscious indifference. In fact, some of the witnesses even said that they would be laughed at when confronted with these things. They would laugh at them. So let's talk about that. Let's look at the negligence timeline. This is, at the very least, what we know beyond a reasonable doubt that Christian Moreno and Abilene Schnieder knew before the events that unfolded on February 24th of 2022. And that begins on September 11th of 2021 when David Avila was attacked by Queen, the brown pit bull, Mama of Snow, the white pit bull. And you heard from David Avila. So we know that's the first dog bite. From talking with ACS, we know that there's a 10-day quarantine that ensues thereafter, and they are released on the 11th day. So we know that on 9/22/21, Christian Moreno came to ACS and took custody of the dogs that they had impounded. That's when the quarantine ended. Now I'm glad that the defense got into the issue of money, because that's going to be relevant. They're saying, oh, these poor pit bull owners, these poor dog owners couldn't afford reasonable care, right? They couldn't afford it. But something that I want to impress upon the court is that there's a very weird set of circumstances surrounding this case. The state of Texas was never fully able to put our thumb on it, but there's this like criminal undercurrent that is flowing throughout the course of this case that just doesn't make sense to us based on everything that we see, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So we know that on 9/22/21 they paid $266 to get these dogs out of custody. On 9/28/21, that is a very short time difference between that event and the second dog bite incident, which is with Fernando Esparza. Now, defense tried to cast that away, like, oh, it could have been any other dogs, and Fernando Esparza perhaps incorrectly remembered the wrong house, right? But remember also, Judge, that that event was also witnessed by Deborah Flores, who saw the man being attacked in the alleyway, and she too recognized those dogs as belonging to these defendants. And that is in fact the dog that was taken into custody by ACS when they investigated, and they responded, that being Queen, the white pit bull. Snow, the white pit bull, like Fernando Esparza identified. So again, on 9/28/21, the second dog bite. 9/10/9/21, 11 days later, what happens? Christian Moreno once again goes to ACS on the 11th day and gets that dog out of quarantine, now paying $306 to get that dog out of quarantine. Now note, the next date is going to appear to be 1 year after. And it is true that for about a period of a year, we don't have any documented dog bites. But that is not to say that there wasn't anything going on in the neighborhood during that year. And we know that for a fact from all the calls that neighbors were still producing in that neighborhood, all the calls that ACS was receiving, as well as the evidence that David Avila provided to us from the witness stand in the form of those photographs and those videos that were dated around that time frame. So we still know that those dogs were still getting out, those dogs were still threatening people, and we have those proofs here, Judge, if I may, that goes to the knowledge of what the defendants knew at approximately that date. We have first and foremost the sign that they posted above their door saying, "F y'all cops, CPS, the mayor, every caller, sucker, you know what, and go to hell." That shows knowledge. We have this, the still from the video, where we very clearly see King and Snow on the loose threatening David Avila, who at that point had already been bitten, with a large chain, loose, not contained. Let's go back to the compendium of negligence. Okay. So then, we get to January 12th, 2023. That is the third dog bite incident. And we have that on camera. That was Deborah Flores, who saw it happen with her own eyes and was able to record it and provided that video to the state. State provided it in the form of evidence. We see King and Legend on the loose attacking a man that was merely walking down Darby, not even Depla, the next street over. And then again, those dogs were taken into custody of ACS, right? And what happens? On the 11th day, the quarantine ends, and this time Abilene Schnieder goes to the location and pays $427 to get them out of ACS care and custody, right? But then we see, and this is what I was talking about, the weirdness with the money and the weirdness with the situation. We know that at some point after that event, they purchased 2 cages, which they didn't use at all, but they had them. We know that they purchased at least 1 harness, which we see in the backyard, a touch to nothing, right? But we know that for 2 months, at least, they were without electricity or running water, no utilities in the house. The house is covered in poop. It doesn't make any sense. Where are they getting the money? Why are they getting these dogs out of custody? Why are they not taking care of their fence, their property over dogs that they know are getting out and are hurting people? It's just so suspicious. We haven't been able to put our thumb on it, but it's just really strange. We do know from the testimony of Mauro Cardona that they bred these pit bulls. We know that. And then, before we jump into the events of the actual day, we were talking about cages. Let's go back to the images. So here are those cages that we talked about. But we also know that these dogs appear to have a large number of old wounds. We see them on their faces.
Objection, Your Honor. There's no evidence on the record about that.
They were healing wounds.
They're healed wounds, old wounds. We can tell. There's fresh ones where there's active bleeding, and then there's old ones. On King, we see another version here, scarring all over their faces, their ears. And on Legend, same thing, scarring all over the ears, all over the legs. On very aggressive dogs. A little suspicious, Judge. Again, couldn't put our thumb on it, but very, very suspicious. And let me switch back to the compendium. So old healed wounds. And I propose to the judge, or to this court, that, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit. Okay, so we get to 2/16/23. This is when there was a really ugly fight between King and Legend. When King attacks Legend after they've been out of ACS custody, right, and they've been spayed and neutered and all that good stuff. This is an admission by the defense, by the defendant. She tells both, both times when she's talking to Detective Blanco of the SAPD homicide unit, that King attacked Legend, and it was a real nasty fight. They couldn't pull them apart. They had to implement their plan of like pouring water on them, despite these dogs being docile and not having any sort of, aggressive history. They knew how to put water on them and not get in the way. Those wounds, this is a week before, essentially, the attack on Mr. Nájera. Those wounds did not look at least a week old. Those wounds are even before then. So, if nothing else, they know that these dogs are biting each other way before that. We also hear from Abilene Schnieder that Snow was showing aggression to Miss Angie, something that she had never done. And that she was being aggressive towards Morena, the puppy, whom Snow took in her jaws and began to shake as though to try to kill Morena. That's a week before, Judge, the fatal attack on Ramon Nájera. If nothing else, if they knew nothing before that point, that is already two very concerning incidents, highly concerning incidents that they should have known about, and they did know about it, they admitted to it, that could have led to the prevention of what happened on February 24th of 2023. But again, conscious indifference. Conscious indifference. And remember, when we talked to the expert, Dr. Crosby, that a female dog attacking its own puppies is highly unusual. Highly unusual. So then we get to 2/22/23. That's the night before Ramon Nájera was killed. And Abilene Schnieder is telling Detective Snowden that King had been known to escape his harness that very night. That very night. And then we get to the fatal events of 2/23/23, when the dog attack results in the death of Ramon Nájera. That is the negligence timeline, and that is just appalling. Who better than the owners of these dogs who were involved in all of these incidents to know exactly what kind of dogs we were dealing with in this case? Now the defense, I think, accuses the state of jumping to the defense of animal control services in the city, but that's not the case. I think they misunderstood what we were trying to do, so I want to clarify this now. What the state was trying to say is that we agree with Dr. Crosby, that it is the owners that have to be held responsible, not some third party, not some understaffed, underfunded third party who doesn't live with these dogs on an everyday basis. We're not saying that ACS could have done better or could not have done better. We wish they had, honestly, right? If these dogs, those affidavits had been sought after more vigorously perhaps, right? And these dogs had been deemed dangerous or anything along those lines, it would have made our job so much easier if this would have happened. We get accused of taking the low-hanging fruit. Judge, this is a criminal negligence case. If the dogs had been deemed dangerous, it would be a strict liability case. Essentially what the state of Texas would have to prove at that point is, hey, are these your dogs? Yes? Great. Did they kill somebody? Yes? Great. You're guilty. That's it. Instead, we have to get into all these events and everything that they knew, right? We don't work for the city of San Antonio. We don't work for ACS. We're not their attorneys. We are prosecutors in the state of Texas. More specifically, Bexar County prosecutors. We serve at the discretion of our elected district attorney, Joe Gonzalez. Our duty is to seek justice for the people of Bexar County, for the people of this state, like the Nájeras. And that is exactly what we are trying to do in this case in the manner that we can. Because like ACS said, those affidavits were never procured. That legal determination of whether they were dangerous dog or not was never done. So we could not proceed under that second part of the statute. We had to go with what we had, which is criminal negligence. And an overabundance of it. Overabundance of it. Conscious indifference. Now I want to talk about the events that unfolded on February 23rd of 2023, Your Honor. And they bear mentioning because they are so important based on everything that we know that led up to that event. Everything that we know that led up to that event. How horrendous the event was and how preventable it would have been. Here's a number of list of things that they could have done in years of time to keep that community safe, to keep Mr. Nahida safe. First and foremost, why didn't they keep the dogs inside the house with the puppies? The puppies never got loose. As far as we know, there are no reports of puppies on the loose. They could have kept the dogs inside the house. But wait, maybe not, because they knew they were dangerous. And if they are attacking each other, perhaps if they're fighting dogs, perhaps if they're trying to kill their puppies, you can't keep them there, especially if you're trying to sell those puppies for profit because you're a dog breeder, because there goes your profits, right? So they had to keep the dogs out of the house for the safety of those puppies. Okay, so that one gets negated, maybe. But that's something they should have known, I continue to argue. Secondly, the fence isn't high enough, you don't have enough money to repair it. Great. Okay, what about harnessing them? Right? Or muscling them by a muscle, by a harness. Tether them better. Tie them up better. Give them up. Give them over to ACS if they're costing you so much money. If you can't keep them safe and you can't protect your own people, right, your neighborhood, all these things that they could have done as the owners of these dogs. And again, conscious indifference. They didn't care about their neighbors. They didn't care about public safety. And that is evident throughout everything that we see. And then we get to the events of February 24th of 2023. And that day, Judge, can essentially be summed up into two words. Tragedy and heroism. Tragedy and heroism. Heroes, like the firefighters who were coming back from a funeral and voluntarily took that call. And when they saw Ramon Nájera being dragged by those pit bulls, hesitated not for a second and jumped out of their vehicle, armed themselves, and charged quite literally into the howling maw of danger to protect their two patients. And we have that on video. 3 grown men, burly men, firefighters for the city of San Antonio, fighting with weapons against these 2 dogs and being unable to keep them at bay. Are we expected to believe that the 2 owners of those dogs who had lived with them for years, who had seen them dragging around heavy chains, who had seen them defeat their fence, defeat their harnesses, defeat anything they tried over and over again, did not know the capabilities and the strength of those animals? That heroism that the firefighters exhibited should have never even had to come into play, because that should not have been the situation. The heroes that were EMS that arrived and tried their best to save the life of Ramon Nájera and aided Janie Nájera. But the fact of the matter is, Judge, that the heroism did not begin with the firefighters nor EMS. The heroism of that day began with Ramon Nájera himself. It really did. A Air Force veteran, a good man by all accounts, a great man. When he saw that Janie Nájera was in trouble, he too did not hesitate for a second to get out of that car and come to her aid. Something that would eventually cost him his life. And let me backtrack just a little bit, just to signify the horror of this situation. I remember when Janie was up there testifying, and she told us this in our office as well, how when she was walking back to the car, she saw that dark-colored pit bull climbing over the fence, like quite literally something out of a nightmare. When she was telling me that story in my office, my mind immediately harkened to like Stephen King and Cujo, right? This dog that's like climbing over the fence to come after you. An elderly woman, like what are you supposed to do? Especially when you know that 3 grown firefighters had difficulty keeping that dog at bay. They had no chance. No chance. But Ramon Nájera and his heroics that again, just like those firefighters, should have never had to take place. 80 years old, 81, with dialysis, right? He had to get out of that car and attempt to save his wife, ultimately paying the ultimate price, his life. And I'm reminded of John 15:13, Your Honor. No greater love hath a man than to give his life for his friends, right? In this case, for his wife. Heroic. Absolutely heroic, but completely unnecessary, because this should not have happened. And who had the most power of anyone to keep that from happening? Christian Moreno and Abilene Schnieder, who basically just showed conscious indifference for years and did nothing Nothing, not even the most reasonable thing, nothing. And this is why we're here. That's what happened. That's the totality of the case. I also want to call into light, Judge, the complete and utter lack of remorse that we have seen throughout the course of this punishment hearing, throughout the course of that interview with Detective Blanco, where every single instance that we see on this negligence timeline was easily explained away by Ms. Schnieder as someone else's fault. In the same way that I would characterize the state's theme of this case as, with ownership comes duty, Ms. Schnieder and Kristen Moreno's theme of everything appears to be, it's always someone else's fault. And for those reasons, Your Honor, for the totality of everything that we see, even from the very beginning, the state has been upfront as to what we were seeking in this case. And we have been seeking the very maximum punishment that can be allotted, and that's 20 years. It's a 2 to 20 case, it's a second-degree felony by the law. And that's exactly what the state is asking for, 20 years, because we believe that every single one of those years is well-deserved based on everything that we see and everything that could have been done for us not to see this. The defense finally leaves it off with talking about contributory negligence and taking into account the actions of ACS. But that's not how this should work. And there's also something that I want to call out that Mr. Aristoteles brought up during the course of the cross-examination of Janie Nájera. He said, Ms. Nájera, do you think that if the city faces consequences for what happens in the form of civil consequences, do you think that it could have a chilling effect on things like this happening in the future? And she said, yes, I do. Well, you know what? The state of Texas agrees fully with that. But we have to keep in mind that that also applies to the criminal side of things. And a lot of what we do as prosecutors in that lofty goal of seeking justice is hoping to keep the community safe. And we know that one way that that can come about is when there are strict consequences for the things that happen, the criminal actions of people, can also keep these things from happening again in the future. We believe that this case deserves it, Judge, and that is why the state of Texas is asking for 20 years, the maximum. Thank you, Your Honor.